Zara did not sleep that night. She sat by her window watching the stars and thinking about Kale's ultimatum. Every choice before her seemed to lead to pain and loneliness. If she continued meeting with Jake, she would be exiled immediately and might damage his career. If she obeyed her cousin's demands, she would lose the only friendship that had ever meant anything to her. The next morning, she avoided the observation deck where Jake would be waiting. Instead, she attended the formal negotiations and watched him work from across the room. Several times, she caught him looking in her direction with a puzzled expression, as if he was wondering why she seemed so distant. During the lunch break, Jake approached her in the dining hall. "Zara, I missed you this morning. Is everything all right?" She forced herself to look away from his concerned eyes. "I have been busy with family obligations, Captain Morrison." The formal use of his title made him frown. "Have I done something to upset you?" "Not at all," she replied stiffly. "I simply realized that our conversations might be misinterpreted by others. It would be better if we maintained appropriate diplomatic distance." Jake studied her face carefully. "Are you saying this because you want to, or because someone has told you to?" Before she could answer, Prince Kale appeared beside them with a satisfied smile. "Captain Morrison, I trust you understand that my cousin must focus on her duties to our delegation." "Of course," Jake replied politely, though his eyes never left Zara's face. "I would never want to interfere with anyone's obligations." As Jake walked away, Zara felt a piece of her heart break. She had hurt the kindest person she had ever met, and the pain in his eyes would haunt her forever. The next 2 days passed in a blur of misery. Zara attended the negotiations but barely listened to the discussions. She watched Jake handle difficult situations with his usual grace and wisdom, and she felt proud of him, even as she mourned the loss of their friendship. On the final day of the summit, Emperor Thane called her to his private chambers. He looked tired and older than she had ever seen him, as if the weight of ruling an empire had finally begun to crush him. "The negotiations have been successful," he said without looking at her. "We have secured favorable trade agreements and strengthened our military alliance with the Krolix." "That is wonderful, Father," she said quietly. "Yes, it is," he replied. "But there have been complications regarding your behavior during the summit." Zara felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of complications?" "The Krolix general has expressed concerns about your interactions with the human delegation," Emperor Thane said coldly. "He questions whether our bloodline has been compromised by your condition." "I have done nothing inappropriate," Zara protested. "Your mere presence at this summit has been inappropriate," her father replied harshly. "I brought you here hoping to demonstrate that you were under control, but instead you have created a diplomatic incident." "How have I created an incident?" "General Vex has threatened to reconsider our military alliance if we cannot guarantee that genetic defects will not influence our future decisions," Emperor Thane explained. "He sees your friendship with the humans as evidence of poor judgment." Zara felt the familiar weight of being a burden to everyone around her. "What do you want me to do?" "You will be transported to the research station tomorrow morning," her father said firmly. "The arrangements have already been made. You will spend the rest of your life there, conducting harmless studies that cannot embarrass our family." "Tomorrow?" Zara's voice cracked with shock. "But you said after the summit ended." "I said many things," Emperor Thane interrupted. "But circumstances have changed. Your behavior has forced my hand." As her father dismissed her, Zara felt the last of her hope crumble. She had tried to protect Jake by staying away from him, but it had not mattered. Her exile would begin in 12 hours, and she would spend the rest of her life alone on a distant world. She walked through the corridors of the station like a ghost, barely aware of the other delegates preparing for their departure. The summit was ending, and everyone would return to their homes and families. Everyone except her. That evening, she sat in her quarters staring at the small bag of belongings she was allowed to take to the research station. A few books, some personal items, and the formal robes that marked her as a princess of a people who no longer wanted her. Soft chime indicated that someone was at her door. She opened it to find Jake standing in the hallway, his expression serious but gentle. "May I come in?" He asked quietly. She stepped aside to let him enter, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and fear. "You should not be here." "If my family finds out, I know about your exile," Jake said simply. "One of my contacts in the station administration told me about the transport arrangements." Zara felt tears building in her eyes. "I'm sorry I hurt you by avoiding you these past few days. I was trying to protect your career." "I understand," Jake said gently, "but I could not let you leave without saying goodbye." They stood facing each other in the small room, and Zara felt the full weight of everything she was about to lose. Jake was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and tomorrow she would never see him again. "I want you to know that our friendship meant everything to me," she said through her tears. "You made me feel like I was worth something for the first time in my life." "You are worth everything," Jake replied firmly. "Your family is wrong about you, and I wish I could make them see it." An idea began to form in Zara's mind, desperate and impossible, but perhaps her only chance. She had spent the past few days learning about human customs and laws, and she remembered something Jake had mentioned about their marriage traditions. "Jake," she said slowly, "you told me that humans choose their own partners based on love and compatibility." "Yes, that is true," he replied, looking puzzled by the change of subject. "And you said that human laws protect the rights of individuals to make their own choices." "Within reason, yes," Jake said. "Where are you going with this?" Zara took a deep breath and made the most desperate decision of her life. She knelt before him in the traditional position of supplication, her hands clasped together, as she had seen in the human cultural files. "Will you wed me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake stared at her in shock, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. "Zara, what are you doing?" "I have researched human marriage laws," she said quickly. "According to Galactic Confederation regulations, marriage between species is legally recognized if both parties consent. If I were married to a human citizen, I could not be exiled against my will." "Stand up," Jake said gently, reaching down to help her to her feet. "You do not need to kneel to me, but will you consider it?" she asked desperately. "I know it is asking too much, but I have nowhere else to turn." Jake studied her face with intense concentration. "Are you asking me to marry you to avoid exile? Or are you asking because you have feelings for me?" The question hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Zara knew that her answer would determine the rest of her life. "Both," she said honestly. "I am asking because I need your help, but also because I have fallen in love with you. You are the only person who has ever made me feel complete." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his brown eyes searching her face. "Marriage is not something to enter into lightly," he said finally. "It should be based on mutual love and respect, not desperation." "I know that," Zara said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "But I also know that I would rather spend my life with you than alone on a research station. If you have any feelings for me at all, please consider it." "I do have feelings for you," Jake admitted quietly. "Stronger feelings than I expected. But I need you to understand what you would be giving up. If you marry me, you can never return to your people. You would be human by law, and your family would disown you completely." "They have already disowned me," Zara replied. "At least with you, I would have someone who values me for who I am." Jake reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face. "If we do this, it has to be real. Not just a legal arrangement, but a true partnership. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," she said, her heart soaring with hope. "I love you, Jake Morrison, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that this is not just about escape." "Then yes," Jake said softly, "I will marry you. Not just to save you from exile, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." As he pulled her into his arms, Zara felt her crystalline skin begin to glow with the first real happiness she had ever known. Tomorrow would bring challenges and consequences, but tonight she had found someone who would stand beside her against the entire galaxy. She was no longer alone, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. The next 3 days passed like a dream for Zara. Despite the warnings from her cousin and the disapproving looks from other Vilithians, she found herself drawn to the observation decks during the quiet hours when most delegates were sleeping. Jake seemed to have the same sleepless habits, and they began meeting by unspoken agreement. Their conversation started carefully, with discussions about the nebula outside and the technical aspects of space travel. But gradually, they began sharing more personal thoughts and experiences. Jake told her about Earth and the great cities where millions of humans live together despite their differences. Zara described the crystal gardens of her homeworld and the way light danced through the geometric structures her people built. Your architecture sounds beautiful, Jake said as they watched the stars together. I would love to see it someday. Most humans find our buildings too cold and mathematical, Zara replied. They prefer organic curves and natural materials. That is what makes it interesting, Jake said with a smile. Different approaches to beauty show us new ways of seeing the world. She found herself looking forward to these meetings more than anything else in her life. For the first time, someone listened to her thoughts without judgment and responded with genuine interest. Jake asked questions about Vilithian culture that no one had ever bothered to ask before, and he seemed fascinated by her perspective on interspecies relations. You notice things that others miss, he told her one evening. Your observations about the Krolik's body language during negotiations were remarkably accurate. I have always been good at reading nonverbal communication, Zara said quietly. Since I cannot share thoughts directly, I learned to watch faces and gestures instead. That is a valuable skill, Jake said. Most telepathic species rely so heavily on mental communication that they miss important physical cues. It was a revelation to hear her condition described as a skill rather than a disability. Jake had a way of reframing her experiences that made her feel capable instead of broken. During the formal negotiations, Zara found herself watching Jake work with growing admiration. He handled difficult situations with patience and wisdom, never raising his voice or making threats. When the Krolik's general tried to intimidate the smaller delegations, Jake calmly redirected the conversation toward mutual benefits. When the Zephyrian ambassador became emotional about territorial disputes, Jake acknowledged his feelings while steering toward practical solutions. How do you stay so calm? She asked him one night. General Vex has been deliberately provocative, and the Altarian delegate keeps making impossible demands. Anger rarely solves problems, Jake replied. I learned that lesson the hard way when I was younger. What happened? Jake was quiet for a moment, staring out at the nebula. I lost my family in a conflict with a hostile species called the Ravagers. They attacked our colony world without warning, and I was serving on a patrol ship that arrived too late to save anyone. Zara felt her heart ache for him. I am so sorry. I was furious for years, Jake continued. I wanted revenge, wanted to make them pay for what they had done. But hatred only made me bitter and ineffective. I realized that the best way to honor my family's memory was to work toward preventing future conflicts. Is that why you became a diplomat? Yes, he said simply. I believe that understanding between species is the key to peace. When we see each other as people rather than enemies, war becomes much harder to justify. His words made Zara think about her own situation. Her family and people saw her as a genetic failure, but Jake saw her as a person with unique strengths. Perhaps the problem was not with her, but with their limited perspective. You have given me a new way of thinking about myself, she said softly. You have always been worthy of respect, Jake replied. I just happen to be able to see what others have missed. Their growing friendship did not go unnoticed by the other delegates. Prince Kale confronted her after the third day of negotiations, his anger barely contained. "You have been seen talking to the human captain multiple times," he said coldly. Fathers began to ask questions. "We discussed diplomatic matters," Zara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am learning about their negotiation techniques." "You are making a fool of yourself and embarrassing our entire delegation," Kale snapped. "The Krolix ambassador has made several comments about your inappropriate behavior." "What is inappropriate about conversation between allied species?" "Do not pretend to be naive," Kale said harshly. "Everyone can see that you are infatuated with the human." "It is pathetic and shameful." Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That is not true." "Then prove it," Kale demanded. "Stay away from him for the remainder of the summit. Show that you still have some loyalty to your own people." That night, Zara did not go to the observation deck. She sat in her quarters, staring at the walls and trying to convince herself that Kale was wrong. But deep in her heart, she knew that her feelings for Jake had grown beyond simple friendship. His kindness and understanding had awakened something in her that she had never experienced before. The next morning, she noticed that Jake seemed distracted during the negotiations. He kept glancing toward the Velithian delegation, and she wondered if he was looking for her. The thought made her heart race with a mixture of hope and fear. Commander Lisa Hayes, Jake's second in command, approached her during a break in the sessions. The human woman was tall and confident, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Princess Zara," she said politely, "may I speak with you privately?" They walked to a quiet corner of the conference hall, away from the other delegates. Commander Hayes studied her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I understand you have been having conversations with Captain Morrison," she said without preamble. "Yes," Zara replied, unsure where this was leading. "I need to ask you directly. Are you attempting to manipulate him for political gain?" The question stung more than Zara had expected. "No, of course not." "Then what is your intention?" Commander Hayes pressed. "Your people are known for their strategic thinking, and a friendship with our delegation leader could be very valuable to someone in your position." Zara felt anger flash through her, a rare emotion that she usually kept carefully controlled. "I am not trying to use him for anything. Jake is the first person who has ever treated me with genuine kindness." Something in her voice must have convinced Commander Hayes, because the human woman's expression softened slightly. "I believe you," she said quietly. "But I need you to understand that Jake's career could be damaged by rumors of improper relationships. The other human delegates are already expressing concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "They worry that he is being influenced by personal feelings rather than diplomatic necessity," Commander Hayes explained. "Some think you might be a trap set by your father to compromise our negotiating position." The idea that anyone would see her as a threat was almost laughable. "I have no political power or influence. I am the defective daughter that my family wishes to hide." "That may be true," Commander Hayes said, "but perceptions matter in diplomacy. If the other species begin to question Jake's judgment, it could undermine everything we are trying to accomplish here." Zara felt the familiar weight of being a burden to everyone around her. "What are you asking me to do?" "I am asking you to consider the consequences of your friendship," Commander Hayes replied. "Jake is a good man who deserves to have a successful career. Do not let your personal feelings damage his reputation." That evening, Zara sat alone in her quarters, wrestling with an impossible choice. She could continue meeting with Jake and risk destroying his career, or she could stay away and lose the only person who had ever made her feel valued. The decision was made for her when Prince Kale entered her room without knocking, his face dark with rage. "Father knows about your midnight meetings with the human," he said coldly. "He is furious." "We have done nothing wrong," Zara protested. "You have been seen alone with a male of another species multiple times," Kale replied. "In our culture, that is scandalous behavior regardless of what actually happened." "Since when do you care about our culture?" Zara asked bitterly. You have always made it clear that I am not truly part of it. You are still a princess, even if you are a defective one, Kale said harshly. Your actions reflect on the entire royal family. What does father want me to do? He wants you to end this foolishness immediately, Kale replied. You will have no further contact with the human captain, and you will make it clear that any previous interactions were purely diplomatic. And if I refuse? Kale's smile was cold and cruel. Then your exile will begin tomorrow instead of after the summit ends. Father is prepared to send you to the research station immediately if you continue to embarrass our family. As her cousin left, Zara felt the walls closing in around her. She had found something precious in her friendship with Jake, but keeping it would mean losing what little freedom she had left. The choice seemed impossible, but she knew that she could not bear the damage. The career of the only person who had ever shown her genuine kindness. Tomorrow she would have to break her own heart to protect the man who had helped her find it. Zara could not sleep that night. The words of exile echoed in her mind like a death sentence, and she found herself walking the empty corridors of Concordia Station in the early morning hours. Most delegates were resting before the second day of negotiations, but she felt too restless to stay in her quarters. The observation deck was quiet except for the gentle hum of the station systems. Through the massive windows, she could see the swirling colors of the Nexus Nebula, beautiful and distant like everything else in her life. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and tried to imagine what it would be like to live on a research station at the edge of known space, cut off from all contact with her people. It is beautiful, is it not? A voice said behind her. Zara spun around to find Captain Morrison standing in the doorway. He was dressed in simple civilian clothes rather than his diplomatic uniform, and his brown hair was slightly messy, as if he had just woken up. She felt her heart race with panic at being caught alone with a human. Captain Morrison, she said quickly, I did not expect to see anyone here at this hour. Please, call me Jake, he said with a gentle smile. I often have trouble sleeping during important negotiations. The mind keeps working even when the body needs rest. He walked over to stand beside her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. She noticed that he moved quietly, without the heavy footsteps that many humans were known for. Everything about him seemed careful and thoughtful. I hope I am not disturbing you, she said, unsure of the proper protocol for speaking with humans. Not at all, Jake replied. I was hoping to find some quiet time to think about today's discussions. The Krolix general made some interesting points about genetic strength. Zara felt her stomach tighten. You agree with him? I found his perspective limited, Jake said carefully. In my experience, diversity creates strength rather than weakness. Some of humanity's greatest leaders have been those who were different from the majority. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or mockery, but found only genuine interest. You really believe that? I do, he said simply. On Earth, we have learned that societies become stronger when they embrace differences rather than fear them. It is one of our core principles. Zara had read about human history and knew that their planet was home to many different races and cultures. The idea that differences could be celebrated rather than hidden was foreign to her, but it sparked something hopeful in her chest. What is it like? She asked quietly. To live in a world where being different is not a curse? Jake turned to look at her directly, and she saw compassion in his eyes. Are you asking about Earth or about something more personal? The question hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. No one had ever asked her about her feelings before, and she was not sure how to respond to such kindness. I have heard that humans judge others by their actions rather than their birth, she said carefully. Is this true? Generally speaking, yes, Jake replied. We believe that who you choose to be is more important than what you were born as. Though, I admit we do not always live up to that ideal. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the nebula swirl in the distance. Zara felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of being understood without judgment. "May I ask you something?" Jake said gently. "Yesterday, you seemed to be watching our delegation with great interest. Are you curious about human culture?" Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I have studied many species as part of my education. Humans are fascinating in their approach to problem solving. What have you learned that surprises you?" She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Your species forms bonds based on choice, rather than genetic compatibility. You marry for love rather than political advantage. You adopt children who are not your biological offspring. These things are unusual in the galaxy." Jake smiled. "I suppose they are. But they work for us. Some of the strongest families I know are built on choice rather than genetics, even if someone is defective." The word slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her honesty. "Defective?" Jake's voice was puzzled, rather than disgusted. "What do you mean?" Zara looked down at her hands, watching the dull crystalline surface that should have been glowing with inner light. "Some individuals are born unable to form the connections that their species requires. They are incomplete, unable to bond with others of their kind. And your people consider this a defect?" "Of course," she said quietly. "How can someone be whole if they cannot share thoughts and emotions with their mate? How can they contribute to society if they cannot join the telepathic networks that bind communities together?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, and she wondered if she had shocked him with her admission. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "On Earth, we have individuals who process the world differently than others. Some cannot see colors the way most people do. Some hear sounds differently. Some think in ways that do not match the majority. We have learned that these differences often bring unique strengths and perspectives. But surely you do not allow them to lead or make important decisions? Actually, some of our best leaders have been those who saw the world in unique ways," Jake said. "Different perspectives can solve problems that conventional thinking cannot address." Zara felt tears building in her eyes. The idea that her condition might be seen as something other than a curse was overwhelming. "My people do not share this view." "I am sorry," Jake said softly. "That must be very difficult for you." She was surprised by the genuine sympathy in his voice. "Why do you care about the problems of a stranger?" "Because I believe that everyone deserves to be valued for who they are," he replied. "And because I lost my own family to prejudice and fear. I know what it feels like to be alone." Before she could ask what he meant, voices echoed from the corridor outside. Zara recognized Prince Kael's distinctive tone and felt panic rise in her chest. "I should go," she said quickly. "If my cousin finds me here with you, there will be consequences." "Wait," Jake said gently. "Would you like to talk again? I find your perspective on interspecies relations quite insightful. You would want to speak with me again?" she asked in disbelief. "I would be honored," he said simply. Before she could respond, Prince Kael entered the observation deck with 2 other Velithian nobles. His expression darkened when he saw her standing near the human captain. "Zara," he said coldly, "what are you doing here?" "I could not sleep," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I came here to think." "And found yourself entertaining humans?" Kael's tone was full of disgust. "Have you no shame left?" Jake stepped forward slightly, his posture calm but protective. "Prince Kael, I believe I was just admiring the view of the nebula." Princess Zara was kind enough to share some information about the local astronomy. "Princess Zara should know better than to consort with lesser beings," Kael said harshly. "Her condition has already brought enough shame to our family." Zara felt her face burn with humiliation, but Jake's expression remained calm and steady. "I find that conversation between different species often leads to greater understanding," Jake said politely. "Perhaps that is something we could discuss during today's negotiations." "There's nothing to discuss," Kael replied. "Some bloodlines are pure and others are contaminated. The galaxy will be better served by acknowledging these realities. I respectfully disagree, Jake said quietly. But I understand that different cultures have different perspectives on these matters. Kale's eyes narrowed. Stay away from my cousin, Human. She has caused enough problems for our family without adding interspecies scandal to her list of failures. He gestured for the other nobles to follow him, and they left the observation deck without another word. Zara stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by shame and embarrassment. I am sorry you had to witness that, she whispered. You have nothing to apologize for, Jake said firmly. Your cousin's behavior reflects on him, not on you. But he is right about one thing, she said sadly. I am a source of shame for my family. Everything I touch becomes tainted. That is not true, Jake said with surprising intensity. You are not responsible for other people's prejudices and fears. She looked up at him, searching his face for signs of deception. Why are you being kind to me? Because you deserve kindness, he said simply. And because I think you are far more valuable than your family realizes. As they parted ways to return to their quarters, Zara felt something she had never experienced before: hope. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her as more than a genetic failure. Someone had looked at her and found her worthy of respect. She did not know what would come of this unexpected friendship, but she knew that Jake Morrison had given her something precious, the belief that she might be more than the sum of her defects. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she would hold on to that hope like a lifeline in the dark. Princess Zara stood at the edge of the Great Hall, watching the other delegates move through the crowded space like colorful fish in a vast ocean. The Concordia space station hummed with activity as representatives from 12 different species gathered for the most important diplomatic summit in decades. Trade routes would be decided here, wars might be prevented, and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. She pressed her hand against the cool metal wall and felt nothing but emptiness where other Velithians would sense the electrical currents that powered the station. Her crystalline skin remained dull and lifeless, a constant reminder of what made her different from everyone else in the room. The other Velithians glowed softly when they were happy or excited, their inner light pulsing in rhythm with their emotions and thoughts. Zara had never experienced that connection, never felt the warm telepathic embrace that bound her people together. You should not be here, said a cold voice behind her. Prince Kale, her cousin and the heir to the throne, approached with his usual look of disgust. His blue skin shimmered with health and power, everything that hers was not. Father grows tired of your presence, embarrassing our delegation. Zara turned to face him, but kept her voice steady. I am part of this delegation whether you like it or not. The Emperor brought me here for a reason. The Emperor brought you here because he had no choice, Kale replied with a cruel smile. The other royal families demanded to see proof that you were still alive and not hidden away in shame. Now they have seen you, and they whisper about our family's curse. She wanted to argue, but knew he was right. The other Velithian nobles watched her with a mixture of pity and horror, as if her condition might be contagious. They made no effort to hide their thoughts from her, speaking freely about the defective princes who would never bond with another soul. Across the hall, she noticed the human delegation entering through the main doors. They moved differently than the other species, with purpose, but without the rigid formality that marked most diplomatic groups. Their leader was a tall man with brown hair and kind eyes who seemed to take in everything around him without judgment. Even the humans stare at you, Kale continued, following her gaze. Though I suppose warriors like them might find your condition fascinating rather than repulsive. Zara watched as the human leader spoke quietly with his team, gesturing toward different groups of delegates. There was something calming about his presence, something that reminded her of the old stories about humans that she had read in secret. They were supposed to be brutal fighters, but this man seemed more like a scholar or a teacher. Captain Morrison has an excellent reputation, she said quietly, more to herself than to Kale. You know his name? Kale's voice rose with alarm. Tell You have not been studying the humans like one of your foolish research projects." Before she could answer, Emperor Thane appeared beside them with his usual stern expression. Her father was a powerful leader who had ruled the Velithian Empire for 3 centuries, but lately he seemed tired and old. The weight of dealing with. Her condition had aged him, and she felt guilty for the burden she had become. "The negotiations begin in 1 hour," he said without looking at her. "You will observe from the designated area and speak to no one unless I give you permission." "Father, I could be useful if you would just let me—" "You will do as I say," he interrupted sharply. "Your presence here is already causing enough talk among the other delegations. The Krolix ambassador has already made several pointed comments about genetic purity and the importance of strong bloodlines." Zara felt her heart sink. The Krolix were their most important military allies, and their support was crucial for maintaining the Empire's power. If they were questioning her father's judgment because of her, it would only make things worse. "Perhaps it will be better if I return to the ship," she offered, though the thought of spending the entire summit locked in her quarters made her feel sick. "No," Emperor Thane said firmly. "You are here now, and leaving would show weakness. You will stay, but you will be invisible. Do you understand?" She nodded and watched as her father and Kale walked away to join the other Velithian delegates. They moved together naturally, their steps synchronized in the way that only bonded Velithians could achieve. She had never experienced that connection with anyone, never felt the warm presence of another mind touching hers. The human delegation was being introduced to the Zephyrian ambassador, a tall blue creature with 4 arms who seemed genuinely pleased to meet them. Captain Morrison listened carefully as the ambassador explained some aspect of Zephyrian culture, asking thoughtful questions that made the alien beam with pride. Zara found herself moving closer to hear their conversation. She had studied human diplomatic methods and was curious to see them in action. Most species approached negotiations with formal protocols and rigid hierarchies, but humans were known for their flexibility and creativity. "Your species has made remarkable progress in atmospheric engineering," Captain Morrison was saying to the Zephyrian. "I read your recent paper on cloud seeding techniques and found it fascinating." The ambassador's forearms gestured excitedly as he launched into a detailed explanation of his people's weather control methods. Other delegates might have been bored by such technical discussion, but the human captain seemed genuinely interested. "Captain Morrison," a voice called out, "I would like to introduce you to our delegation." Zara turned to see a Krolix general approaching with several other military representatives. The reptilian creatures were impressive in their scaled armor and carried themselves with the confidence of natural predators. "General Vex," Captain Morrison replied with a respectful nod. "It is an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," the general said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I have heard much about human military capabilities. Your species has quite a reputation for warfare." "We prefer to think of ourselves as protectors of peace," Captain Morrison replied calmly. "War is sometimes necessary, but it should never be the first choice." The general's laugh was harsh and cold, spoken like a true diplomat. "But we both know that strength is what matters in this galaxy. The weak are consumed by the strong, and only the genetically pure can hope to survive." Zara felt a chill run through her at those words. The Krolix philosophy of genetic superiority was well known, and it was part of why they supported the Velithian Empire's rigid breeding programs. She was everything they despise, a genetic anomaly that threatened their vision of a perfect universe. "I find that diversity often leads to strength," Captain Morrison said thoughtfully. "Some of humanity's greatest achievements have come from those who were different from the majority." "An interesting theory," General Vex replied with obvious skepticism. "Perhaps we will have time to discuss it further during the negotiations." As the conversation continued, Zara noticed that Captain Morrison's eyes briefly met hers across the crowded hall. For just a moment, she felt as though he was seeing her rather than looking through her like most people did. There was no disgust, or pity in his gaze, only curiosity and something that might have been kindness. The moment passed quickly as other delegates demanded his attention. But Zara found herself thinking about that brief connection. When was the last time someone had looked at her as though she were worth seeing? Princess Zara, a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to find her father's advisor, Minister Kane, approaching with his usual disapproving expression. The Emperor requests your presence in the private chambers. There is something he wishes to discuss with you. She followed the minister through the winding corridors of the station, dreading what her father might want to say. The private chambers were luxurious, but felt like a prison as she waited for him to speak. The other delegates had been talking. Emperor Thane said without preamble, "Your condition is causing complications for our negotiations." "I have not spoken to anyone or caused any problems," she protested. "Your mere presence is the problem," he replied sadly. "The Krolix are questioning our genetic integrity, and several other species are wondering if our bloodline is weakening. I cannot afford to have them doubt our strength." Zara felt her world crumbling around her. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that when these negotiations are complete, you will be relocated to a research station on the Outer Rim. You will live quietly there and pursue your studies without embarrassing the royal family further." "You mean exile," she whispered. "I mean protection," he said firmly. "For you and for the Empire. It is the only way." As her father left her alone in the chamber, Zara stared out at the stars and wondered if there was anywhere in the galaxy where someone like her could belong. The humans had seemed different somehow, but even they would probably reject her once they learned the truth about her condition. She was truly alone, and tomorrow the exile would begin. The battle for Kepler Station had been raging for 3 days when everything changed. Jack's Fifth Fleet was outnumbered 5-1, facing a massive coalition force that included ships from 7 different alien species. The station was humanity's last stronghold in the sector, and losing it would open the door to Earth itself. Jack stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching the tactical display with grim determination. His ships were fighting bravely, but they were running out of ammunition and fuel. The enemy had them surrounded, and reinforcements were still hours away. At this rate, they would be overwhelmed before help could arrive. "Sir, the Resolute is requesting permission to ram the enemy flagship," Captain Morgan reported, her voice strained. "They've lost engines and weapons. It's the only way they can still contribute to the battle." Jack shook his head, denied. "Tell them to evacuate to the other ships. We don't sacrifice our people unnecessarily." It was the kind of decision that separated Jack from other commanders. Where others might have accepted the heroic gesture, Jack refused to waste lives. He had learned from Lyra that every person had value, and he would not forget that lesson even in the heat of battle. The enemy pressed their attack, concentrating their fire on the human ships. Jack watched as the cruiser Defiant exploded in a ball of fire, taking 300 good people with it. The enemy cheered over the communication channels, celebrating their victory. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command," the communications officer announced. "They're ordering us to retreat. The station is lost." Jack felt a surge of anger and frustration. Retreat meant abandoning the civilians, still trapped on Kepler Station. It meant leaving thousands of people to die at the hands of the alien coalition. Jack had never abandoned civilians before, and he wasn't about to start now. "Signal all ships," Jack ordered. "We're going to make one final push to evacuate the remaining civilians." Full power to engines and weapons, the human fleet began moving toward the station, fighting desperately through the enemy lines. Jack knew it was probably suicide, but he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. The civilians were counting on them, and Jack refused to let them down. Just the situation seemed hopeless. Something extraordinary happened. Long-range sensors detected a massive fleet dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The ships were sleek and elegant, with the distinctive design of the Veilter Empire. "Sir, we're being hailed by the Veilter fleet," the communications Officer reported, his voice filled with confusion. "They're requesting to speak with Colonel Jack Collins personally." Jack felt his blood run cold. The Veilter had arrived with enough ships to tip the balance of the battle completely. If they joined the coalition attack, humanity's defeat would be swift and total. But why would they specifically ask for him? "Put them through," Jack ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Veilter command ship. The figure standing in the center wore elaborate armor that gleamed with an inner light. The armor was clearly ceremonial, designed more for show than protection, and it was decorated with symbols that Jack didn't recognize. "Colonel Collins," the figure said, her voice transmitted through the ship's speakers, "I am requesting permission to come aboard your vessel. There is something we need to discuss." Jack's heart nearly stopped. The voice was different, stronger and more confident than he remembered, but there was something familiar about it. Something that made his hand move unconsciously to the crystal pendant in his pocket. "I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of a battle," Jack replied. "If you want to talk, you'll have to wait until we finish evacuating the civilians." The armored figure seemed to nod with approval. "Very well, but perhaps we can help with that." The Veilter commander turned to someone off-screen and spoke in her own language. Moments later, the massive Veilter fleet began moving toward the coalition forces. But instead of joining the attack on the humans, they opened fire on their supposed allies. The battle turned in seconds. The coalition forces, caught completely off guard by the betrayal, found themselves trapped between the human fleet and the Veilter armada. Ships that had been pressing their attack moments before were now fleeing in panic. All coalition vessels. "This is Empress Lyra of the Veilter Empire," the armored figure announced over the general communication channel. "You will cease your attack on the human forces immediately and withdraw from this system. Any ship that continues to fire will be considered an enemy of the Empire." Jack felt the world spinning around him. Empress Lyra, the small, frail alien, girl he had saved 5 years ago, was now the ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. It seemed impossible, but there was no mistaking that voice or the way she had emphasized protecting the civilians. The coalition forces were in complete disarray. Some ships tried to fight both the humans and the Veilter at the same time, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Others attempted to flee, only to be pursued by Veilter fighters. Within an hour, the system was clear of enemy vessels. "Colonel Collins," Empress Lyra said, her voice now calm and formal, "I'm coming aboard your ship. Please prepare a shuttle." "Bay for my arrival," Jack nodded numbly. "Of course, Your Majesty. Shuttle Bay 2 will be ready." Captain Morgan looked at Jack with confusion. "Sir, do you know this Empress? She seemed to know you personally." Jack touched the crystal pendant in his pocket one more time. "We met once, a long time ago. I helped her when she was in trouble." 20 minutes later, Jack stood in the shuttle. Bay as a sleek Veilter transport landed on the deck. The bay was surrounded by honor guards, but Jack had ordered them to keep their weapons lowered. Whatever was about to happen, he didn't want to start with hostility. The shuttle door opened, and several Veilter warriors emerged first. They wore the same type of armor as their Empress, but theirs was clearly functional rather than ceremonial. They took positions around the shuttle, watching the human guards carefully. Then she appeared, and Jack felt his breath catching his throat. The armor made her look larger and more imposing than he remembered. But when she removed her helmet, there was no mistaking those violet eyes or that pale blue skin. It was Lyra, but she had changed in ways that went far beyond the impressive armor. She was still small by Veilter standards, but she carried herself with a confidence and authority that commanded respect. Her silver hair was longer now, braided, with small gems that caught the light. Most importantly, her eyes held a strength that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Jack," Lyra said, her English now perfect and unaccented. "Do you remember me? I'm the alien princess with a frail body, the one you chose to save." Jack felt tears forming in his eyes. "Lyra, I never stopped thinking about you. I always wondered if you made it to safety." Lyra smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the frightened girl he had rescued 5 years ago. "I made it, thanks to you. But more than that, I remembered everything you taught me. About strength, about protecting others, about how every person has value." She stepped closer, and Jack could see the emotion in her violet eyes. "You saved more than just my life, Jack. You saved my soul. You showed me that there was another way to live, another way to lead. Everything I've become is because of the lessons you taught me." Jack shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just helped someone who needed it." "That's exactly what made it special," Lyra replied. "You helped me not because I was useful to you, but because it was the right thing to do. You treated me like a person when my own people treated me like a burden." Jack looked at the impressive figure before him, trying to reconcile this powerful empress with the dying girl he had found in the ruins. "How did you become empress? What happened to your family?" Lyra's expression grew serious. "That is a long story, one that involves civil war and political revolution. But the short version is that I used the lessons you taught me to change my entire empire. I showed them that wisdom could be more powerful than strength, that protecting others was more important than conquering them." She gestured to the armored warriors around her. "These are not just my guards, Jack. They are believers in a new way of thinking. They follow me not because I am strong, but because I am right." Jack felt a surge of pride and amazement. The small alien girl he had saved had grown into a leader who was changing the galaxy. "I'm proud of you, Lyra. You've become everything I knew you could be. And I have something for you," Lyra said, reaching into her armor. She pulled out a crystal pendant identical to the one in Jack's pocket. "Do you still have the sigil I gave you?" Jack pulled out his pendant, and both crystals began to glow with the same inner light. "I've carried it with me every day since." "You gave it to me," Lyra nodded with satisfaction. "Then you know that I never forgot you either. I have been searching for you for 5 years, Jack Collins. I have been waiting for the chance to repay the debt I owe you." She looked around the shuttle bay, taking in the human guards and the ship beyond. "And now I have found you, just in time to save you as you once saved me. The war is about to change, my friend. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when an alien princess remembers the human who chose to show her kindness.